Welcome, low ego action heroes. This is Debbie Levitt from DeltaCX.com. We're a full service CX and UX agency. And today is, according to rumor, March 1st, 2021. And this is episode 102, Introduction to Information Architecture, which I've hopefully spelled correctly. Tell me in the chat room if I didn't, because sometimes I don't notice till the next day and I can't fix it. I am extremely excited to introduce our guest. So I'm going to jump right in and say, hey, everybody, Abby is here. Abby, please introduce yourself and spell your name for those listening.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Debbie. Thank you for having me. My name is Abby Covert, A-B-B-Y-C-O-V like Victor, E-R-T. I'm an information architect. I practice out of Melbourne, Florida. I'm currently writing a book about diagrams, and I wrote a book called How to Make Sense of Any Mess, which is a beginner's guide to information architecture. So I'm here to answer any of the questions you might have about what is IA or how do you use it or get good at it.
Yes, thank you, because holy cats, there is just not enough information on the interwebs about information architecture. Is it just me? Have you found a treasure chest of IA stuff?
Well, Debbie, I actually did a little bit of digging into my library, which the ones that are looking at home, you can see behind me. So I have some books that I want to plug in terms of information architecture. So I have like a little bit of a pitch of like why you would want each of these books. So I'm going to start by going into the Wayback Machine. So I'm going to show you the first book that I got as an information architect to learn about information architecture. This is Information Architecture for the Web and Beyond. Back when I got it, it was called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. So it has been rewritten several times and broadened since then. They actually took on an additional author since then as well. But this is a really great O'Reilly book that gets into the real brass tacks of how to practice information architecture. And if you're doing so in a web context, this is basically akin to the Bible. And we call it the Polar Bear book. So if you ever hear it shorthanded that way, that is what they are referring to. The older ones are turquoise, the newer ones are purple. And that's important because the turquoise books are tech books and the purple books are design books. So information architecture actually graduated in the O'Reilly family from the tech side into the design side with this most recent publication, which is something notable, I think. The next book that I want to recommend is a book if you are trying to figure out kind of the big picture of like, why is information architecture important? So I want to plug Intertwingled by Peter Morville. This is a wonderful book. It's very philosophical and it goes in depth into sort of like the reasons to believe in thinking about structure and language and why that might be impactful on whatever you do, whether that's making websites or making pretty much anything at all. So I can't say enough good about this book. Similar to that is if you want to think about it from the user experience designer's point of view in terms of the responsibility that we have to users in practicing information architecture, I would recommend this book called Living in Information by Jorge Arango. This is a wonderful book that gets into sort of like the mental models that you need to have as a practicing information architect or as a designer who's utilizing information architecture principles in their work every day, which spoiler alert, you are.
Thank you.
Yeah. Debbie had mentioned in the lead up to this call that you all might have been introduced to card sorting in some of your educational pursuits. So I want to remind us that there is kind of like a tome about card sorting, and that is this book here by Donna Spencer. But I also want to suggest that you start to pair it with the work of Indy Young, which is around mental models and practical empathy. So these two books are actually two that I recommend to my students a lot when they're looking to find out what is it about card sorting that is valuable. Because just having people move a bunch of cards around is not actually the valuable part. What the valuable part is taking all of that into yourself and then applying it to the work that you're doing. So I would say that like you can start with kind of the brass tacks of how does the methodology work from Donna's point of view, and then layer on sort of the theory and sort of the understanding of kind of the human mind and how we work with other people's information with Indy Young's work. And then last, but very much not least, I want to plug this book called Everyday Information Architecture by Lisa Marie Martin. This book is incredibly practical. It will literally take you step by step through an information architecture project on the job. And she does a wonderful job of making that really applicable to a lot of different use cases and types of design scenarios. So this is a absolute must read. And yeah, I think that's our book portion for
Before
now.
I start throwing the softballs at you, we have a question to please repeat the two books that came before. I think it was Indy's books. What were the two that you were holding up? What were the names of those?
So the first one is called Mental Models.
Okay. Thank you. By Indy Young.
Yep. And the second one is called Practical Empathy, also by Indy Young.
Okay, that's INDI Young, YOUNG, for those not looking on the screen. And Kayleen in the chat room says, I have saved them all on my Amazon shopping list. So
Excellent.
Thank you.
Happy reading.
Yes, thank you. So now let's wind back for a moment. And for those who are super new to this topic, what's information architecture and why do we care?
Okay. All right. So I'm going to break it down super simple. Information architecture is the way that we arrange the parts of something to make sense as a whole. That's it. Now, what comes to mind for many students at this point with such a broad definition is two things. One, wait a second. Does that mean that it applies to like literally every single thing? Isn't that a little land grabby? And then the second is, if it applies to every little thing, how do I get to the part that's just about the thing that I'm trying to make right now, which in a lot of cases is a website or an application or a process that you're trying to enable with software of some sort. So I would say that like for folks like that, I would say that you really need to focus on the two pieces of information architecture that are kind of most readily malleable with what we do as designers, which is the language and the structure. So what is the language that you're using in the thing that you're making? And is that language understandable to your audience? And what is the structure that you're providing on the thing that you're making? And is that accessible and understandable to your audience? And that's sort of like at the most basic sense of things, that is what information architecture is. So I brought an example that's not digital because I wanted to really make sure that this was clear in terms of the everydayness of it. This is a project that I worked on probably, 8 years ago for IHOP, the International House of Pancakes. For those of you in the United States, you probably know about IHOP, the International House of Pancakes. For those of you internationally, you might not. Turns out, not so international House of Pancakes. Anyways, so when I worked on this project, it was really an information architecture assignment because they had this menu that literally had pancakes on every single page. 16 syrupy, sticky pages, all with pancakes on them. And yet, when people came to this restaurant in 2012, they would ask the waitstaff what to order because they could not see all of the pancakes. Turns out, by upping the pancakiness of putting pancakes all over the menu, they had actually made pancakes completely unfindable. So for a new user that didn't know what IHOP stood for, they got very confused as to what kind of restaurant is this? I see taco salad. I see beef stew. I also see a variety of breakfast items. I see waffles. I don't know. What is this place? So in the redesign, we made some very simple changes, one of which was just to put all of the pancakes with the pancakes. And it changed the entire course of things. And that is an information architecture story. Now, you might say, what was the little delay in you opening this menu after 8 years? And I say to you, that is pancake syrup. Because if I zoom in right here, you might start to see that it is a very dirty, used menu that was stolen from an IHOP in New Jersey by the art director on the account. Because yes, it turns out that when you are the information architect on such a thing, you are not actually entitled to a menu without theft. So 8 years later, IHOP, I hope that you will not be mad at me for having somebody steal me a menu, but here we are.
Here's the thing that strikes me about that story, and I'm curious about the people in the chat room, but I think one of the things that strikes me is like, that's so obvious. Like, it seems so
Oh, yeah.
obvious that all the pancakes would go on some sort of page together, even if other pages wanted to promote pancakes in some way. You still organize all the pancakes together. Was there something about the strategy, as you may have understood it from IHOP, if you know it or can share it, that said, just throw pancakes everywhere? Like, was this a strategic choice or was it a lack of strategy choice?
It is what I like to call, and my good friend Dan Klein first told me this saying, it is because reasons, Debbie. It is because a host of reasons. In IHOP's case, it was about serving a network, a growing network of franchisees through a redesign and a what they termed war on breakfast. So there was this period of time. You asked the question, Debbie, and so I'm giving you the
I'm
answer.
just trying to think about the war on breakfast and how whether it's more or less
know.
important than the war on drugs. And
I mean, when you come into agency work, there's a war on everything. It's always like a slide, the war on whatever it is in the industry. And it's very sad. And I wish we could stop using this. But this was nonetheless the strategy that I was walking into was all hinged against the war on breakfast. And part of the war on breakfast was this sudden realization by this kind of like casual dining, emergent restaurant trend that breakfast all day was a thing that people wanted. Now, IHOP had over the years, they had breakfast all day, right? They kind of had the breakfast all day thing all cornered up. But what they had done is they didn't have enough of a market for breakfast all day because it wasn't like a consumer mindset as much, except for I don't know, like a random treat or something like that. So they had introduced all these, non-breakfast items to try to serve other day parts. So they were trying to go for come in at 5 o'clock for the over 65 price meal. So they had the pot roast dinners, and they had the fish on Friday, and they also had different regional things where they would have different things that were very regional to a place. Like I heard an IHOP that had fried green tomatoes as a special on their menu. It was like, okay, and that was just that one IHOP because it was a franchisee. So my point is that I think with a lot of information architecture, what happens is that you can't not have an information architecture, but you can surely not think about the one that you have, and it will emerge as it feels like. And I think that that's kind of what happened, is that IHOP was just breakfast. We have to tell them about breakfast. So it was you're on a page about taco salad and pot roast, and they're like, breakfast. We need to tell you about breakfast. Because in their mind, it was about, upholding the brand. So, I think it's really interesting that you think about kind of how things change over time. There was an interesting revision to my IHOP case study in 2020 when they reduced this menu down to a single sheet of paper that could be printed in store and then disposed after every customer. Now, that's an information architecture decision as well, right? That was something that when I was working on the business in 2012, if I had started with that, I would have run into all sorts of problems, right? I would have run into a problem of scale that restaurants think I get all of this sticky, glossy space to advertise about my brand. I don't just get one 8.5 by 11 sheet that's in black and
Make
white,
a book.
just no, it needs to be special. It needs to have our story.
I was just going to say the story.
No, it's exactly. And so I couldn't have sold that, or look at the environmentalism impact back then. That was a huge consideration too for us in this menu redesign, was we had to keep the printing low because you didn't want to constantly be turning these things over. And these have to be heavily laminated to deal with all of the pancake syrup. So it's a whole thing. So, I think that that's a really good lesson too for information architecture of the context and the intention really matters. There's no such thing as the perfect pancake menu, right? There's only the perfect pancake menu for a certain customer in a certain moment that is defined in the context of the world at that moment, So did they have to redesign the architecture of this thing in 8 years? No. But now that it's 2 pages, it'll probably never go back to being 12. And it'll definitely never go back to being 16, which is where I started with them. So I think that's it's an interesting non-digital example that I think is easily applicable to the things that we make in digital.
Yeah, thanks. Now we're getting a question from Bill in LinkedIn, but Bill is an old school master of our universe. So before we get to Bill's question, let's just do some more introductory stuff. So, Bill, I see you. We'll get there. Let's talk a little bit more about this because, as we know, many courses and schools and boot camps, their approach to information architecture quite generally tends to be, hey, there's a website navigation, you need to improve it, and maybe you want to do a card sort. And I find a lot of people are confused about what is information architecture and when am I doing it? So do you think you can tell us a little bit about the interplay between information architecture and interaction design?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're designing anything, and let's go specifically with digital things, like let's say a website, we'll go super, super simple. Let's say we're designing your portfolio website, which hopefully all of you have or are currently making to represent yourself well on the onlines. Okay, so if you were going to do that, you would need to be thinking about a lot of things. You would need to be thinking about what you want to say to the audience that you're trying to, meet the needs of. In this case, maybe it's people that might be hiring you for a job. So once you understand who you're building the thing for, this is where we really start to get into the information architecture process, right? We need to start to think about what are the things that this website could have to meet the needs of this person. And once we know what the things are, so let's say it's case studies and about thing about you, some links out to all the things that you've done on the internet, and maybe like you did some writing or something. So you have some articles you want to link to. That's all the stuff that you have. Now, at this point, you have your content, but you do not yet have an information architecture. Well, you kind of do because you probably have like a doc or something where it's in a list. That's currently your information architecture. But if you want to make an information architecture for a person to see on your website, you're going to start to break the space that is the website into pieces, right? Sometimes the pieces are just sections of a page. Like I want a one-page website because I only have a few things. And so I'm going to have a hierarchy on one page that's going to show what I have. And on that page, we have an information architecture. The order in which you intend for users to read through that thing and the arrangement that you've made to encourage that, that is your information architecture. So let's say that you made a big headline up top and then you made some littler like H2s down here, smaller headlines. That would be a simple architecture where you're saying to the user, this is the main thing and these are the two underneath things, right? That's a simple information architecture. If you were going to do something more complex that involved, let's say, having different pages on your site, this is the point at which you need to make a decision about navigation, right? Navigation is and structure, right? So when you're creating the structure for your website, you're making a lot of decisions that are not just information architecture. Let's say that you decide to divide your information architecture of your website into 3 pages. You have your home page, you have an about page, and you have a case study page. Those are 3 pages in your information architecture, and you could make many interaction design decisions about how to represent that structure to your user. So let's say that you decide to run them all across the top. That's one decision that you could make to represent your information architecture in an interaction design pattern that a user could actually access. You might decide that you don't want all that up top. You actually want to condense it down to a little hamburger menu. If you do, please label it because people don't actually know what that is. And so once you've opened that up, maybe then you see your 3 things. So you've now made an interaction design decision. You've also introduced an architectural difference. So in the first version, you're looking at all the links and you're as a user seeing all those links right up front. The second version, you as the user have to go to another place to see all those links. That's an architectural difference. You can kind of think about it architecturally like you would a room in a house, right? We've decided that we're going to put that in the kitchen instead of in the living room. It's very similar on websites. So once you have all of the things that you want to organize, you decide the structure for the things that you want to organize. You also are kind of at the same time doing this delicate dance around the language because the labels that you pick for those things matter just as much, if not more, the way that you actually structure them together. So let's say that you open the menu on your personal website. Let's remember it's an about page, a case study page, and a home page, right? But let's say that you open up your little hamburger menu and it says apples, bananas, and pears. no one's going to find your stuff in there, right? They're going to look at that and they're going to go, I thought this was a UX portfolio website. I must be in like some sort of a weird art experiment or something. Now I use that ridiculous example because I want to illustrate the point, because I go to people's personal websites all the time and what they have is mystery meat navigation, where you do not know what you're about to get. And the reason is often because of some sort of like creative expression. I was on a mentoring call with an author who's working on their personal website last week. And we were having this really interesting conversation about labeling. And like, as a writer, shouldn't we be able to artistically label things if that's the way we wanted to? And we got into this great conversation about the difference between art and design. So the minute that you're writing for yourself, that's art. But if you're writing for other people, it's design. So when you're writing those labels for other people, you have to think about the other people and whether or not they're going to be able to find those things. I've had knockdown, drag out fights with copywriters over cute labels for things. Sometimes I've won and we've gotten the good label that people know. Sometimes I have lost and the mystery meat wins. I have the Google Analytic reports to show for both. So I know what works. And sometimes if your intention is to be creative and artistic and vague and get people to be like, ooh, I wonder what that is, a mystery meat link can be really effective. Anybody who's really good at email marketing knows that, right? Like, you want to give just enough so that they click on the link so that they go to the place. Well, that's their intention, and they're doing their intention very well from a labeling standpoint. So it's really, at the end of the day, the structure and the language. And if you're working on structuring something or picking the language to describe the thing that you're structuring, you are working on the information architecture. But I want to warn you, this is not something you should look at as like a phased plan where you're looking at, the information architecture is the first thing, and then you do the interaction design, and then you do the visual design, and then you ship it. That is a failed model that I think all of us have learned ourselves through at this point. When you're doing the information architecture, it has to be much more like a thread that you're weaving all the way through and you're constantly checking in with. And that does mean that at some point you move away from doing information architecture work in information architecture documents, and that can throw people off. People can think, oh, well, if I make a sitemap up front to get my team's alignment, and then we change the sitemap along the way, but we don't update the document, are we doing information architecture? The sitemap is not information architecture. The sitemap is a reference to a decision that was made about the information architecture. So when you're working on the information architecture, ideally, you're working on the thing that the user is actually touching. But often we're making diagrams or documents that are about the models for how we're explaining the structure to the people that we're working with. So you can get confused that like making a sitemap is setting the information architecture, and then interaction design is basically like, I don't know, betraying the information architecture with every decision you make that's different. But that's actually not the way to look at it. They're actually two halves of a very solid coin when practiced that way.
I do agree. Something I say a lot on this channel is I remind people that whether it's wording or structure or your screen layouts or anything else, everything should be meaningful, actionable, and helpful to the target users and customers. Would you say that this is information architecture?
I would say that is information architecture, Debbie. You have an audience, which is these lovely people who want to learn about this thing that is what you do and what you talk about. And so you've made a diagram to represent a model that is in your mind a good way of teaching these things and making that point. And you've made a visual reference to it so that other people can have a more memorable association with it. And you've given it labels because labels make things teachable. Boom. You've considered the grade level. I mean, you could have made very I don't know, vague labels for that same thing. Actually, I'd love to see that happen. Could you make the douchey version of that diagram? Yeah, what would it be? It would be like,
I try to keep my diagrams relatively simple, even though I'm a terrible visual designer. So I don't have to.
I think we could ruin it just with labels. I think we could just ruin it completely with labels. Like, what's a word that we could use for meaningful that would be super esoteric and just not useful?
Oh, wow. An esoteric word for meaningful. That's so meta.
Yeah. Woo. Come on, channel, help us out.
Meaningful but esoteric. Kayleen wrote life.
Yeah. Okay. So the red circle would be life. And then the purple circle, let's see, a less useful word for actionable. Pervasive.
Maureen says obscure.
Obscure. Okay, great. Love it.
Right.
Obscure, pervasive, and what about helpful? Let's see.
Nice.
Nice. I love it. It's purposefully vague in like a beautiful way. I really like it. Okay.
It's good. It's good. It's right, and it's nice.
Yeah. See, I mean, it's like, okay, that just made it really hard to apply. But if you wanted to take it into a kindergarten classroom and explain it to them, maybe that's a better model.
Right. These might be ninth grade words versus kindergarten words. So you've got to know your audience. Exactly. Solomon, one of my favorite low ego action heroes who watches our show from LinkedIn, says, in short, there's no information architecture step. A diagram is an artifact to explain how the thing is structured, but not the thing itself. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Dreamy stars.
It's a painting of a pipe. Exactly. Yes. Yes. That was brilliant. I love it. Thank you. That was brilliantly rendered.
Thank you, Solomon. I hope to have him on the show someday. He seems interesting, but I don't know him. So thank you, Solomon, there. Let me roll back to Bill's question so he doesn't think we forgot about him, though his question is a little bit more advanced. He says, architecture is like herding cats. How do you navigate the architecture by committee when internal subject matter experts feel they know more than you?
Ooh.
I know.
Okay, Bill. Hi, Bill. I see you. I've been you. I want to talk right to you, Bill. Okay. So here's the thing. I find that unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we can't choose our way out of the people part when working on information architecture. So my best advice, and honestly, I rejected this in the first 5 years of my own practice, and it was a disservice to me. We have to look at the people as a material that we're actually working with in the IA process. So what I see too often, and what I used to do a lot in my own practice, was I would be in my bat cave, making sense of my thing, and then I would come out with the thing. And like, I was being user-centered about it. You know, I was doing research ahead of that to understand the user. I was digging into the audits. I was really getting into the material. I was talking to people, but then I was kind of going dark and doing a thing and then coming back with a thing and going like, ta-da. And what I ran into is that when you do that, people go, whoa, 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 why? What, where, how did you, wait, what is that? And where did that come from? And what about that? And did you think about this? And ha, 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 ha. And so for years, I felt like I was just banging my head up against the wall, dealing with that in revision in the documentation process. So it'd be like, I would do my Batcave thing. I'd make a sitemap, or I'd make a flow diagram of a process I was working on. And then I would just go into revision, and I'd do revision 1, 2, 3, 4, revision 15 later. And still, I would feel like I didn't really get what I wanted out of it. It was watered down. It felt like death by committee, the whole thing, you know? So instead, what I started to do about 10 years ago was I started to interview people individually ahead of doing any work on the information architecture with them. So instead of just jumping into my process, I spent good time with every person individually. And the reason that I did it individually is because you have to separate people from the herd, like quite literally. If you get like, let's say you get all the marketing people together, which a lot of time people want to tell me that I should do that. It's like efficient. Oh, just talk to the whole team. You are never going to hear the real story if you talk to the whole team. You're just not. And that's the story that I'm looking for, because I'm not looking to make decisions in those rooms. And that's what I think people fear, is that like, oh, you're going to make a decision with one person, then these people aren't going to be involved. I said it very clearly up front that I'm doing stakeholder interviews. There is a list of questions that are set. I'm asking everybody the same exact list of questions. And over time, what I've developed is a script of questions that really allow me to understand what's going on with the people part of the information architecture. And then what I like to do is put all of the people that I talk to into a room together and tell them what I heard. And in that presentation, I usually tell them all of the things that they agreed on so that they can be like, woo, we're doing so good. We're so
aligned.
And then we slowly start to move into the territory that they are not aligned in. I never call out individual people, but I call out themes. I do things like play devil's advocate, where I jump onto the side of a person that maybe has the less popular opinion in the room. And I'll try to like, hey, so from what I'm hearing, there are people who think like this. And like, here's a way to think about it like that, just to see if like reframing outside of like the person can make the idea stand, which often, unfortunately, is the case, is that people's kind of, I don't know, their being gets all over their ideas and then people don't want them as much. It's sad, but it's what happens when we work with people every day and things happen and things pile on. Once again, you can't choose your way out of the people part. So yeah, I think, Bill, you need to start to spend some good time with especially those subject matter experts and stakeholders that are thinking that they know better about something than you. That's a really critical moment for me to understand that like you need to spend time individually with those people and ask them about their experience as an interviewer, like as an actual researcher, where you are not putting your own thoughts into the room. And that's a really, really tough skill to develop, but I think that it's a really critical one if you're going to do that kind of high level IA work with other people, which you can't do high level IA work without. So
I love this. I love this because to me, it's such a departure from so much of the workshopping that we tend to hear about, like just run a workshop, get everybody in a room, find alignment. And I love the idea that first you're doing individual interviews to learn various things about people's expectations or ideas or models or strategies, goals, KPIs, whatever it might be. And then you're bringing them together. And before the project goes further, you're going, there's a bit of a car crash here where not all y'all agree with each other, and we should probably make sense of that mess first.
So I will reference the very first step in my book, which is identify the mess, right? Because that's the thing that everybody is doing in their own head, is they're identifying the mess, but they all have their own mental model about the mess. And so when you walk into a project that has, let's say, just 5 people, which is like a small project in a corporate environment, every one of those people comes to it with their own model of the problem. And if you go into a room like a workshop as a facilitator and try to get at all of that all at once, you're going to
find alignment.
You're going to have a lot of power dynamics at play. You're going to have a lot of very strange, like people giving in based on past experience that you don't have any insight into because you've never, discussed with these folks the power dynamics part. What I've found is that if you get into these individual conversations with people and you do create that environment of them understanding that you're doing this as a researcher and that you're not sharing this with anybody else and that it's going to be anonymized before anybody sees it, people really open up and they tell you what's real. And sometimes the thing they tell you is like, I had a woman one time tell me in one of these interviews, she was like, if you do your job right, my entire team will probably be let go. Yeah.
And
you want to talk about dark moments in consulting? There's one for you. Yeah. You know what? She wasn't wrong. She wasn't wrong. But you know what? By saying that, she was able to face the reality of what was coming her way. And her team didn't end up getting fired at all. They ended up being a really critical part of the redesign effort. But her attitude before we had that conversation was really clear that that was what she was bringing into every single one of these reviews, versus us having a simple conversation about that and me showing that I had respect for her expertise and her experience and that I wasn't here as like a bulldozer to like get rid of everything and start over, and that I was here to build and like stand on her shoulders. It changed the whole dynamic. And then when we did have that workshop a couple weeks later, when I knew everybody and the things that we were discussing were workshoppable, like I already know all of the things that you guys disagree on, and we've already worked through our approach to that. Now let's talk about some actual taxonomic decisions for your e-commerce catalog. Like now we can have that conversation, and I know who everybody in the room is. I know what their mental model coming to the subject matter might be. I know about their past experience and if it's gone well or not, having these conversations in the past. And it makes a huge difference in my ability to be effective and in making sure that they get out of it what I'm trying to get out of it.
Great. Thank you so much. That's such a wonderful point. And we've got some more questions queuing up in the chat room. But first, I just want to take a moment to remind everybody, won't you please join me on Twitch? You can follow there. It is of much less delay. I don't know if you guys can tell from the stream, but I see those comments. It's a less than 7-second delay. YouTube is 20 to 30 seconds and LinkedIn is up to 3 minutes. So I do want to see more of you on Twitch. You can also press exclamation point giveaway on Twitch and join our monthly giveaway. Last month it was my books, and this month it'll be free consulting time with me or coaching time. And enter, no purchase necessary, void where prohibited. And also, let's see, what else is happening on Twitch? Yes, thank you. Nicole just showed it to everybody in Twitch. You can do that, or I think you can put exclamation point ticket. I see questions from Kayleen and a couple of other people. I see your questions. I will ask them. And thank you, Just Judo, for waving at us. And also on Twitch, I now have subscriptions. Yes, that means money. Don't worry, Twitch keeps half of it. But I'm hoping that since we do all this for free, that you're willing to support the channel and my love of delicious cheese. And please subscribe on Twitch. It's only $5 a month. So thank you to everybody there. Oh, Dr. Big Bro is here. Everybody check him out too. All right, so let me roll back and look at some of the questions that we got. Bill, of course, said thank you, and he had to run. And let's see, rolling back to Sujish's question. Sujish says, what's the impact of conversational UI when it comes to IA?
Yes. Okay. This is a great question. So when you talk about information architecture for digital things, I think that we can get into a place where we think that hierarchy is like the only way that things are connected to one another. But when it comes to conversational UI, there's other types of connections that pieces of data can have with one another architecturally that become really important. So, on top of hierarchical arrangements in information architecture, there's also something called an association. So this is like if, let's see, guacamole is a type of dip, that is a hierarchy. Chips being dipped in guacamole, chips and dip are not actually in a hierarchy together, although they might be in like a snack food or like if you arrange them in other ways. But in this case, you know, there may be two different hierarchies that they're coming from, but they're associated with one another. So when you're doing conversational UI design and designing for sort of like the AI set of concerns, you're really going to start to get into the non-hierarchical arrangements that information can take. So you're going to start to hear words like ontology, which is basically like a non-hierarchical representation of language and how it connects to one another. So for example, in that example of if we were making like an ontology of snack food, we might have a little section that has things that you dip in other things. And that might be a part of our ontology. And we might have example objects or entities in our ontology that are of each of those things. So things that you dip being chips or crudité, and into would be dip or peanut butter. So yeah, when you get into conversational, you're going to start to want to look more into that side academically from an IA standpoint. So yeah, look up words like ontology, controlled vocabulary. There's some really interesting, choreography. There's some really interesting information architecture work that's being done in that space though, for sure.
Great, thank you. And thanks for the more lightning questions. We have about 20 minutes left, and I've got 4 questions queued up. Friend of the show, Sotiris, is here. We're planning something with him in March. It is March. He says, out of the stakeholder interviews, which question have you observed to be the most uncomfortable for them, yet the most revealing for the project?
Ooh, that one's easy. What about this project keeps you up at night? That's the question. You cannot ask that first. By the way, you can't get into a room with a stranger and ask that question. Don't do it. I've done it. It's a really bad idea. It's a bad look. Don't do it. It's not cool to do that. Even though it feels kind of cool to like come in and be like, let me just drop that, see what happens. You can, but you should not. I have in my Etsy shop, I have a guide to stakeholder interviewing, and I go into like the whole framework that I use. So I'm going to take the second to plug that.
Please do. How do we find your Etsy shop?
Yeah, Etsy.com/shop/Abby the IA.
I'll put that on the screen.
Thank you, Debbie.
Etsy.
I appreciate
Well,
that.
sure. It takes me a moment. Etsy.com/shop/Abby the IA. Let's put that up on the screen. And everybody go there and buy things.
Just to answer that question, in that stakeholder interviewing guide, one of the things that I propose is a framework for how to arrange your questions to build rapport with stakeholder over time so that you can ask a question like that and not seem like a jerk. And for it to be like a well-timed. If you do it right, we'll kind of like push back, do a, you know, okay, here's what's real. And then people tell you really interesting things, just about like, you know, like I think that the woman that I referenced that told me she was afraid her team would be, you know, not part of the company anymore if we succeeded. That was an answer to that question. And I don't think she would have told me that if I hadn't asked, right? Because when I was asking about the website, I wasn't really inviting her to tell me about her emotions. So I find that like having that one question that really invites people to tell me about their emotions, but like in a kind of like a, we all have things that keep us up at night about this project. What's your thing? Because it's a thing everybody has. I'm asking everybody these questions, you know? It feels like you're not calling them out for being worried. Another question that I really like to use towards the end is the magic wand question. You know, if you could magic wand anything to be different about the situation, what would you change and why? And here's the thing that's interesting about this. Almost always I get to say afterwards, well, that wouldn't take magic at all, would it? Because it's almost always something that they could actually do, which I just think is so beautiful. You know, sometimes people just need to hear it come out of their own mouth. So.
Beautiful, beautiful. And speaking of beautiful, I want to thank Kayleen for posting a low ego action hero emoji over on Twitch. It should have floated over my face. I am still testing these, so I apologize that your emoji did not float by over my face. Some of them are and some of them aren't. Like I noticed when I did this in Twitch, I got this emoji floating by. That is like tongue out, wacky face. So I am still working on testing this, but thank you for Kayleen posting the low ego action hero emoji that I created last weekend. Okay, next question is also from Kayleen, friend of the show, and she says, this is slightly over my head as a junior newbie, but super interesting, and I'm really curious about the kind of question Abby asks in individual interviews. So we just heard a couple of those. The lightning version, since we are burning time, can you give us just maybe a handful of questions that might also be good ones for these stakeholder interviews, please?
Yeah, one that I don't find that people ask enough is just, what's your role? Like, what's your role on this project? What's your role in this mess that we find ourselves in? I find that people don't ask that, especially with people that they work with, because they think that they should already know. But I find that if you come to it with a researcher mind, then it becomes something that you're then allowed to ask. I love to ask that of CEOs and executives, because I'm obviously supposed to know what their job is, and I often do not know what their job actually is. So asking them in context to the project is always very interesting. I also ask them about past experience, not just in the mess that they find themselves in, especially not just in the company that we're in currently. So a lot of times this is how I find out that they used to work for a core competitor, or they worked on a project in a different industry that was very similar, or like some unique reason that might lend to their experience. So I kind of work through their position before I get to their convictions, which is like what they believe about the problem. Then I get into their doubts. That's where I'm going to ask them if they're going to stay up at night about any of this. And then I leave room for color at the bottom. So that's like basically circling back on anything they told me before. And that's also when I'll take off my researcher veil and like go off script with them a little bit to get more details about what's going on.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. This question is from Sahil on YouTube, and the question is, the map of reality is not reality. That's because there are reductions of what they represent. How does this statement fit with UX? Whoa, is this too...
Okay. No, I've got it. Okay, so there's this quote that I love. It's from a mathematician. I think his last name is Box, and it is, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And so that's how I want to answer your question, is that like when we do the work of information architecture and in the UX process, we are often working on our own mental models about the problem and the audience and how we're going to serve that audience with the thing we're making. So it's kind of all over everything. But it does mean, to my earlier point, that your sitemap is not your information architecture, that the thing that your users are experiencing uniquely, that's your information architecture. And I think that that's really, it gets back to sort of like, if you look into the absolute chaos and controversy over just defining the term information, you will quickly fall down a rabbit hole. And for those of you nerdy enough to do it, I highly encourage it. But basically there's, some, myself included, that believe that information only exists in the heads of our users, which means that we can't make it, which means we can't make structures for it either, right? All we're making is content and putting that content into structures that we hope land with the structures in our users' heads that we would have put there, but we can't force it. And I think that like, yeah, I sense a lot of anxiety in that question about the bigness of IA, but I want to meet that anxiety with curiosity, and also like it's exciting. It's a newish field, so it's fun to kind of be part of defining it if that's something that you're into.
Awesome. Thank you. And yes, lots of people in Twitch. Sorry, I still don't have all the emojis floating over my face. My boyfriend was setting off a cat with sunglasses, and that went by, but it's half working. It's half working. Great to see Yarly on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us. And let's see. Also, we've got Dimitris, who was recently a guest for famous episode 100, where we ate cake. And Dimitris says, how would you suggest we begin the taxonomy for a brand new research repo? Any pitfalls we can avoid?
Oh, the research repo, Dimitris. My condolences to you to have this problem that many teams have. I have personally been on at least 3 teams that have had this very gnarly problem of like, we have all of this research and it's so great that we're building this body of knowledge over time, but where do we put all of these things to make them useful to people? So what my advice would be is to not get too theoretical and academic on the problem that you get yourself into an analysis paralysis about it. I have seen many teams go that direction. There's some really interesting work that Tomer Sharon did on atomic research units. I don't remember how he termed it. But he was working on a system for a long time that was about that. I think a lot of people have kind of like gone down that research repo thing. And what I keep seeing is a kind of a repeatable mistake of trying to go for kind of the white whale of it all, where it's ultimately tagged and searchable and everything is the smallest useful increment, and you've got governance and timeliness, and you've worked out all of the intricacies of like who's allowed to see it and in what places and all that stuff. It's just such a big ask. In the teams that I have seen tackle it, what we always end up with is a damn spreadsheet. So I invite you to do something better and then write me an email about it, because I really want to hear what you guys do. It's a really gnarly problem, but if you were going to do it, I would say you need to figure out what the actual use case is and then pick the tools and the structure and the right language based on that, because it's really a metadata problem. It's breaking down your research that you want to repo into the most atomic unit that you then want to tag with metadata so that it's findable by other people. And that all sounds real simple, but it's actually really hard. So, and it's always like somebody's part-time job or something. Hopefully you have like a design ops or a research ops team that's taking it on, and it's not somebody's, idea of a good idea that they're going to do in their nights and weekends when they're not on other work. Because I find that that's also what a lot of people are doing.
Negative 5% allocation. We've got 2 questions queued up, but I wanted to ask one to make sure it fit in, because when I do a lot of reviews of portfolios, especially for recent bootcamp graduates, I tend to see the same information architecture mistake made over and over, and I'm hoping you can please speak to it. I tend to see somebody write in their portfolio case study like, now here's my information architecture and here's my user flow, and they actually show a sitemap. For the newbies in the room, can you help us understand the difference between what is a user flow or a user flow chart or something like that versus what is our sitemap?
Yeah. Okay. So a sitemap represents the architectural structure of the website, which usually is you're breaking down what you're seeing in the actual URL schema. So when it says www.website.com slash, the things that come after the slash, those are generally representative of the sections of your website. The map of how all of those architecturally connect, like which ones of those pages are connected to which of the other pages via navigation mechanisms that you've provided in your design, that is your sitemap. And that most likely will look like a tree of some sort where there's like a home page and then everything kind of hangs off of it. And some of them are super wide and very shallow, and some of them are super narrow and very deep. And it just depends on kind of what your website is. If you're looking at a flow diagram, generally what you're looking at is a user's actual experience. So let's say that we're on a grocery store ordering website. The website is going to have a sitemap that's going to show you like all of the different aisles or categories that they have of groceries. And then there's going to be like a little thing for your cart. Well, when you click on the cart and you go through a thing to check out, that's a flow that you probably are going to want to represent if you're working on the design of it based on what steps is a user going to see in what order, and sort of representing it from the flow kind of sense. So that's when you would see a flow diagram. What I do a lot of is actually sitemaps that have flow diagrams as parts of them. So a checkout is a really good example. If you're doing a really simple e-commerce site, you might want to have one diagram that is the e-commerce hierarchy, and then your cart that has a little flow diagram that trails off of the side of it, which is another lesson to your viewers, because diagrams are not locked in gold. You can do whatever you want with them. And that's part of the fun of them, is being able to mix them up and match them. And I think that there's a lot of really interesting potential there.
Great, thank you. And this is just a Twitch message from my bot, so don't forget to subscribe over on Twitch. Say hi to the bot, or you can ask the bot questions with the 8-ball, exclamation point 8-ball. Ask the 8-ball questions. Stephanie was saying, just a quick comment, and then I'll go back to the questions. Stephanie wrote, we put, I think I can put this up on the screen. We put each user interview testing transcript a Jira action ticket so we can use Jira search. Then priority matrix in Excel with user number so we can reference back to that interview. Not ideal, but kind of efficient so far. All right.
I love it. That's a great information architecture for what you're trying to do. And I mean, like, you know, everybody's got things that they're doing like that. And it's not always a big fancy tech solution. Sometimes it's just like a neatly arranged spreadsheet of links to other things.
And here's a question from Sunrise. How do you know when you've gathered enough information of your users, stakeholders, or the mess itself before looking toward actionable efforts? How do you know when you're ready for action?
It's so hard because I feel like there's some people who will go too soon and then some people who will wait too long. And so you want to kind of like try to hit both. You know, you don't want people who are going to jump in too quick. And then you also don't want people who are going to wait around and just make maps and maps and maps and maps and maps and never be done with the dang thing. So, I feel like at a certain point, I want to bring it around to something Debbie said at the very beginning about it being obvious. I find that when I'm about to give the like proposal of the thing, and the reason that I know that I'm ready is because it feels like Captain Obvious called and he wants his structure back. Like once you feel like that about it, that's when I feel like it's done. If you're still feeling anxiety about it, if you still feel like maybe you're not sure if people are going to get it, oh, look, that's so cute. Hello, doggies. And
I also made Don Norman emoji. I hope you enjoyed that.
Is that who that was? Oh,
yes.
That's very cute. Yeah, I like that a lot. Hi, Don. Yeah, so I just, I think that, things are great. I'm very distracted by Don Norman's face. And
I'm so sorry. I had to do that. Yeah. So, and thanks to Stephanie for subscribing. When you subscribe, you will get, over my face will be a fountain of dogs, Delta CX logos, and Don Normans.
Nick, more people subscribe. We got to see that again.
Subscribe, everybody. Nicholas says, thank you, Debbie, for having Abby, and thank you for the insightful experiences and answering our burning questions. Can't wait for Debbie to have you back on the show. We've got a follow-up question from from Dimitris, and then these will have to be our last two questions, everybody, because we are almost out of time. Dimitri says, sorry in advance, but any thoughts on how we can counter misinformation architecture?
Oh, such a good question.
Isn't he the best?
Okay. I don't know that I have any notes on how we can combat it, but here's what I know and here's what I'm scared of. I am scared that we are not, as a community, admitting that these people are doing really effective information architecture work in ways that are very, very frightening because they are so effective in getting across misinformation. And so I think that like the only way to combat it is to try to understand it. I know that there's some really interesting work being done in the IA community and like the Anti-Defamation League. And there's a lot more of like the ethical conversations starting to come to the fore about like, what is the ethical responsibility of an information architect and of architecture work in information spaces. But yeah, I think that like at this point, honestly, my best advice is to try to not be the purveyor of misinformation architecture yourself. Like there will be businesses that will be looking for these services from people who have been trained in these things. And as these ideologies become more mainstream, people will start to look more and more for more professional services. I mean, we saw that with campaigns in the US on using Facebook, you know, I mean, like they're using tools that we're designing. So yeah, it's a topic that's very close to my heart. As an information architect, there's a lot of people out there that I think feel that way and feel a little bit like, gosh, what could we possibly do to combat it? So at this point, it feels very personal as like a, you know, don't purvey it, call it out when you see it as what it is. I would not shy away from calling it misinformation architecture. I really like that. I've also heard disinformation architecture, and the difference between mis and dis has started to be discussed in really interesting ways. Yeah, more of a comment, I guess, from me than an answer to your question.
Loved it anyway. We're going to go with one more question, then I'm going to give everybody some upcoming events of what else will be on the live streams, and then we're going to have to say goodbye for now to Abby. So the last question also comes from Sunrise, which is, what's the most pleasant surprise of helping people with information architecture?
Oh, okay. Clarity is a gift. Like people come to me sometimes with so little clarity about whatever it is. And they're just like, please help me, anybody. And,
Yikes.
oh, wow, you're getting so many subscribers. This is so good. And yeah, I think like that's the thing that I get out of it. That's the pleasure to me is that, yeah, it's just a gift to like spend the time with somebody to help them get clarity and to provide a framework or an idea or a reframe of something that's been keeping them up at night. Like, what more could you want, you know, from your time on this earth, I guess?
I have to apologize if the audio started sounding weird. Is the audio sounding weird? I am so sorry. So evidently the last subscriber made the audio sound weird. It's sounding weird to me. If it's sounding good to you guys, then I don't care. But thank you to the subscriber who created the flood of icons over my face. And Abby's audio is sounding weird to me, but if it's okay for you guys, then there you go. But however, when my new supercomputer comes, this will be fixed. So it's the supercomputer problem. All right, so quick show notes for what's coming up, and everybody mark your calendars. Tomorrow, of course, is Office Hours Ask Me Anything, where I go live for an hour taking your questions. Wednesday the 3rd will be Dr. Seth Finkel will be back talking about people-pleasing versus self-advocacy, and we're also going to include talking about burnout in there because Destiny had such a great question the other day. Monday the 8th, we're going to be talking to Julia DeBari, who has been an instructor at 7 boot camps, so we're going to learn how the sausage is made. The March 9th is going to be Office Hours Ask Me Anything. Wednesday the 10th, no broadcast because it's going to be live video networking with the Slack community. So if you want to join our Slack community, it's free. We have almost 500 people there, though not that many are active. deltacx.link/join Slack. Moving into the next week of March, Monday the 15th is going to start a renaissance here. Many of you have asked me to do actionable how-to lessons. And I'm going to be starting a month of micro lessons on learnings around observational research. So that will start on Monday, March 15th. Remember, you can always check deltacx.link/events to see a Google Calendar of all the upcoming stuff and add it to your Google Calendar. Yes, I'm looking at my Google Calendar. Tuesday, March 16th is going to be a fun comedy office hours Ask Me Anything, as Canadian radio host and comedian Russell Bowers will be joining us to answer your questions about CX and UX, because he knows nothing about CX and UX. So that should be good. Wednesday the 17th will be part of our micro lesson universe. Tuesday the 23rd will be Office Hours Ask Me Anything with Steve Portugal. So very happy to announce that. And other than that, it's just going to be weeks of micro lessons around observational research. We're going to take a little bit of a break from the normal podcasts to focus on that. So let's see what's going on in the chat. I stopped watching. Everyone's saying thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. 2 things you should never see being made: laws and sausages. And everybody's saying thank you. So Abby, quickly tell everybody, how can we find you, connect with you, follow you, buy from you? Give everybody some plugs and some URLs, please.
Okay, so number 1 is my book, How to Make Sense of Any Mess. It is available on Amazon. It is available on Kindle. It is available for free at howtomakesenseofanymess.com. Shh. If you have the money to buy it, that's awesome. And I'm a self-published author, so please buy it. If you don't, I totally get that. And I want the world to understand information architecture. So the whole thing is there for you for free. I also have a lot of my work at abbycovert.com. I have a lot of free tools on there for information architecture. I also have a lot of low-cost tools. I have, I think it runs around 90 minutes Pluralsight class that is an intro to information architecture. And yeah, I'm online at all of the things, usually by Abby the IA. I answer my social media much slower than I answer my email. And I answer both slowly because I have a 2-year-old. But I'm writing a new book about diagrams, so that's exciting. And I have a mailing list that I am using to combat the algorithms. So sign up for my mailing list if you want to know what's going on with me. Otherwise, the algorithms may or may not tell you about it. And you can follow me on all the things to have them may or may not do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And to everybody in the Twitch room, actually to all the chat rooms, you had great questions today. Thanks for joining. Twitch, I will work on those emojis. Thanks for putting cats and clouds over my face. Abby, thank you so much. People are already requesting that you come back. People are saying listening to you speak is a treat. Someone else has asked you to please run a workshop. So,
Okay. I got to write a book first, you guys. I got a book on diagrams I got to write, but I am working on a short workshop about diagrams that I'm going to be sharing on my mailing list this month. So get on that and look at my Etsy shop because there's lots of new fun stuff coming. And Debbie, I'd be happy to come back anytime. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. We will have to plan that. So I'm going to play us out of here. But Abby, thanks so much again. I'm so happy to see you on the show and such an honor to know you in general. And thanks again. And hopefully we will see you maybe after all the micro lessons, maybe late April or something like that. Thanks, everybody. Be safe. Bye.
Bye.
Delta CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation